The motion is that the matter be read a second time. I call the member for Rockdale.
Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak against the government's Strata bills and the disastrous ramifications they will have for some of the most vulnerable members of our community. It is frankly outstanding to see the total arrogance in which the Baird Grant government holds our society. They've been developing these acts behind closed doors for months, yet have given this House less than a week, just days, to consider more than 300 pages of legislation. I cannot stomach and cannot see how members opposite can stomach the idea that with the impending passage of this Act, we will see the rights of many hundreds of thousands of homeowners stripped away retrospectively through the so-called Strata schemes renewal package. Mr. Temporary Speaker, the only thing that's been renewed here is the Conservative Party's contempt for the community. It defies belief that the Liberal Party, the so-called party of individualism, would launch such a disgusting attack on the fundamental property rights of hundreds of thousands of people living across our state. Mr. Temporary Speaker, I would call on those opposite, those who truly believe in traditional values of conservatism and liberalism, to join me in amending these bills. I know there are members opposite, ministers like my friends Anthony Roberts and Dominic Perrottet, who are of true liberal conviction. And yet, those people of real liberal values seem to have been abandoned by the rest of those opposite, by their so-called friends and allies. If the changes enacted by these bills were not so far-reaching and damaging, it would be almost laughable to see the Liberal Party so proudly championing collective ownership and power over the rights of individual property owners. I'm sure that many of those opposite are quietly furious that they could be so betrayed on this issue by Mike Baird and Victor Dominello. This legislation is not making New South Wales number one again. It is reducing our property rights to be the worst in Australia for strata owners. Mr. Temporary Speaker, it is entirely unconscionable that the Baird Grant government would allow strata owners to be effectively voted out of their own homes. This is an assault on some of the most treasured values we hold dear as Australians. I know that my friend Minister Perrottet may be too young to have seen the castle, but I'm sure many of the more mature members opposite would be able to tell him that this legislation undoubtedly goes against the vibe of the thing. Mr. Temporary Speaker, I have no idea whether the Baird Grant government would wish to give such an obvious free kick to the type of unscrupulous property developers who would love to exploit these laws to boot vulnerable people out of their homes. It is particularly disturbing to see this move in the wake of the outrageous abuse of the public trust we have seen through the Liberal Party's illegal donation racket, the push by former Major Liberal Party donor and Newcastle Lord Mayor Jeff McCloy to contest the ban on property developer donations in the High Court, and the stubborn refusal by the Baird Grant government to match Labor's commitment to ban property developers from serving on our local councils. Mr. Temporary Speaker, a disturbing pattern is starting to form in the conduct of this government, a sense of hubris in their actions. There's been no community push for these bills, no desire or need to see these laws introduced. This is simply a case of an unaccountable minister and a premier taking his nice guy image for granted. It will take more than a long-winded Facebook post or a professionally crafted tweet to sell these dud laws to our state. Mr. Speaker, the people of New South Wales depend on us in this place to stand up for their rights, not retrospectively sell out their property ownership to the highest bidder. I challenge the Premier to tweet about this to his followers, to let them know that he doesn't believe that people living in strata should have the right to the safety and security of their own homes. Mr. Speaker, it is little wonder that Minister Dominello would rename his fair trading portfolio, because no decent person could describe this legislation as fair. Mr. Speaker, anybody familiar with the building and development industry would be able to inform the Minister that there are plenty of operators out there who would be quite willing to engage in unscrupulous conduct to secure a sale agreement. I assure you it will not take long before good, honest, hard traders are undercut by the shonks and the phoenixes who are only concerned with making a quick buck. We need legislation that pursues best practice, but instead we are seeing bills that practically encourages the worst sort of rip-offs and rorts. These bills assume a startling amount of legal literacy is being held by the elderly and infirm residents who will come under attacks as a result of these laws. The idea that a vaguely defined advice and advocacy service would put retirees who are simply trying to live out their golden years in peace on the same footing as Sydney's major property developers is just an absolute farce. Mr Speaker, Mike Baird loves to be the nice guy, but this is simply not nice legislation, and I would encourage the Premier to cross the floor and maintain his rosy facade. This is bad legislation. It is poorly thought out legislation. It is legislation that goes against the Australian spirit, and I would urge all members opposite to stand by our community and amend it. Thank you.
The question is that the bill now be read a second time. I call the member for Summer Hill.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.